Hi everyone. I am so sorry that you're getting me here later than usual, but just know we are here and I am so excited to bring you today's immigration live. If you have questions, put them in the comments and please let me know if you can hear me because my mic was acting up and I want to make sure that you can hear me before I get too deep into this conversation. All right. So remember, let me know if you can hear me, if you just join in. And yeah, hi everyone. Make sure to say hi in the comments and let me know if you can hear me. Okay. Let me know if you can hear me loud and clear. And hopefully there's no echo. Um, all right. So, first thing first, we all know. We all know that there's been changes and we have to kind of deal with those changes. And we're always, things are always going to be coming up and we have to be prepared for them. We have to kind of know what's going on to know the best way to prepare. If you have not watched the Know Your Rights video on my channel, please go ahead and watch that so you know what to do if you are stopped by ICE, if you are in your home and ICE comes to your home. So in that, I talk about, the right to remain silent, the right to an attorney, all this stuff, right? And I also have a recommendation of having you know, your documents with you as far as if you have an application pending with USCIS, right? If you have an application pending with USCIS to have documentation of that with you. I am going to be changing kind of that recommendation. So please listen up. So when it comes to ICE interactions, your first instinct is sometimes to, show them your documents to, explain that you have cases pending and you have things going on. But here's what actually happens, right? Once you give ICE documentation that shows them that you are in the US undocumented, they can then use that as probable cause to arrest you and detain you. Okay. And we want to avoid that by all means necessary. So, the first thing is when you are having an ICE interaction outside of your home, remember you have the right to remain silent, right? You do not have to answer any questions by ICE, including giving your name, where you're from, any of that information. And as hard as it is for us, I know for me as an immigrant, I have a hard time sometimes not explaining myself, right? I want to explain so that the other person will understand and move accordingly. And sometimes that's actually the problem. So we want to make sure that as we're going through, life in the U.S., and if you happen to have that ICE interaction, that you are choosing to remain silent. You are not giving information to ICE, especially about who you are, where you're from, because that they can then use that against you and use that as a reason to detain you. So you really want to be careful with that. Now, let's talk about what you should do, right? I just talked about not giving them information. If for some reason you are still detained, that's where those documentation will come in handy. So I'm still telling you to have that on you, but know that if you are not detained, do not voluntarily give that to ICE. But if ICE already detained you, what you can now do is show them those documents to prove one, that you've been in the US for more than 2 years to avoid expedited removal, and to show them that you have a case pending. Okay, so if you have either of those two things, either to show that you have a case pending or that you've been in the US for more than 2 years, so you are not subject to expedited removal. So that's where you want to bring that in. If they do not detain you, please do not give them the document. All right. Hi, Pedro. Feel free to ask me questions, okay? This is a Q&A. I know this is not my usual time of being live, and some people are going to miss me today because it's not my usual time, but feel free to ask me questions. I know a lot is happening. I've been doing a lot of Know Your Rights presentations for communities where I live to basically make sure that people know what they can be doing, communities know what they can be doing to support um, members of their community that may be scared, right? Scared of ICE picking them up. What will happen to their family? How can the community rally around those people? So that's been the conversations I've been having recently with members in my community. So ask me your questions. If you're watching this on the replay and you have questions, please go ahead and ask me as well. One of the recent updates that we are seeing is that if you have an I-751, so removal of condition application that was denied, right? And now you are in removal proceedings. Technically, you're still a permanent resident, right? You can get proof of your residency. But if you choose to travel outside of the US, CBP is telling their people not to let you back into the US. All right. So if you have an I-751 pending and you are in court, so you filed your removal of conditions, the USCIS denied it and referred you to immigration court. You have your court proceedings, you've been going to court, or you have a future court date, and you choose to travel outside of the US, just know that the directive right now to all the airports is to not let people in when they are in that specific situation. So please, if you have an I-751 that was denied and you are right now in immigration court, it doesn't matter if you got that ADIT stamp saying that you are still a permanent resident. They do not care about that anymore. And they will use that to keep you outside of the US. So if you are already outside of the US, please be careful. Be careful. And this is mostly for international flights, right? When you are going from outside of the US back into the US, you're going to need to show that you are basically you have the documentation to be allowed back into the US. All right. I see a question here. Is it safe to fly domestic with my real ID? I have a pending VAWA case, but I recently got a DUI case dismissed after court supervision. Honestly, it depends where you're going. It depends the airport. There's a lot of factors in play here. So you really want to be careful and make sure it's something, you're going somewhere um, and that it's necessary. Right now, it's better to stay where you are and not take any unnecessary risk. So even though taking a domestic flight should not be an issue, we don't know for sure if that's going to also be added to the list, right? So that's kind of always a problem for us, is that we cannot tell when these policies, because these are all internal policies, until we see them in action, or if someone decides to, give us a heads up, we wouldn't know that. So it's really important that you do not take any unnecessary risk. If you do not need to travel, stay where you are. That's basically my advice right now. What about green card holders? Green card holders are able to travel in and out of the US. There's no limitations on those. What I was talking about was specifically to people that are in immigration court. Okay, if you're a green card holder and you're in immigration court, do not travel, right? But if you're a green card holder with no criminal records that make you inadmissible, you should be just fine. But if you are a green card holder or you have an I-751 and you're in immigration court, you're going to have a hard time coming back into the US. So be very, very careful. Hi, Sam. Thank you for joining me. So remember, traveling outside of the US right now, unless you're a citizen, is going to be a little dicey, right? But if you're a permanent resident and you do not have any criminal records and you're not in immigration court proceedings, we are not seeing any issues with those travels. Okay, so want to make that clear. If you are a US citizen and you heard about the story, I actually did a video on Tuesday about it, where people were worried about traveling outside of the US with their, especially people that are dual citizens. Don't be afraid to travel. You are a United States citizen and you may be a citizen of another country. You are allowed to travel to that other country with that country's passport. Okay, but when you're leaving the US, you need to make sure that you have your US passport with you, right? They're not going to stamp the passport when you're leaving, but you need to have it with you when you're leaving the US. Does not mean that when you're going into another country, you must enter that country with a US passport. All right, so it's really, really important. There are countries that do not allow for dual citizenship, so you will need to get a visa for those countries if you are trying to become a US citizen. But again, US citizens typically are not included in a lot of these enforcement actions. Now, there's the denaturalization stuff, which is a completely different subject altogether, and does not affect what we're talking about today. All right. So, next thing that I want to tell you all is that if you are in a state that's seeing high enforcement, you need to also be aware, right? That there's going to be false information, there's going to be things happening that may scare you, but you need to make sure that the information that you're relying on is accurate. And sometimes it's hard to figure out if it is or not when you are too focused on just making sure you're safe. So here's my recommendation. Always choose safety first. Okay. So sometimes the information is not accurate, but you rather take it seriously in the moment and then do your research once you've gotten to a safe place. If you are in public, right? If you are in a public place, it's going to be harder for you to have any privacy rights. However, if you are, let's say, at a doctor's office and the only way to get to an exam room is to be a patient, to have an appointment, that exam room is a private place, right? It's a private space. So a physician can choose to not give ICE permission to come into that exam room. So there's public places where anyone can just walk in. Those are public places. So McDonald's is a public place, right? However, the kitchen area at McDonald's is not a public place. So sometimes we just need to know what's public, what's private, and where do ICE need permission or a warrant. Okay, if it's a public place, they do not need permission and they do not need a warrant. However, if it's a private place, they need one of those things. Either the person that owns the establishment gives them permission to come in, or they have a warrant that allows them to come in and get the person that they're looking for. So again, this is part of the conversations that we're having in my community, specifically about how hospitals, different places that provide support for undocumented immigrants, how they can so basically how they can create private public spaces, right? So if you're going into a doctor's office, can they make it a smaller waiting area where anyone that's that's public versus private. So it's a lot of conversations happening, and I am encouraged that there's a lot of providers that are looking for ways to support the immigrant community. So I am very happy to say that. I know that is not the case everywhere, right? I happen to be in a state, in a place that people are pro-immigrant for the most part, and are willing to help for the most part. So if you are in places where that is not the case, I am so sorry. And you will need to kind of take it upon yourself to know what's going on and to protect yourself. All right, next question. Oh, well, you're very welcome. I'm always happy to give updates, because things change all the time. Like I said, things change all the time. So we want to make sure that you are as informed as possible. All right, Manny, after keeping families together application, a number was generated. If ICE detain a person, it will be okay to provide them with that number. It may work to show more than 2 years in the US. Well, keeping families together, yeah, I guess. So if the person is detained, right? That's the key part to it. Is if the person is detained, then sure. If you have documentation that has that a number on it, then yes, ICE can use that to look you up and see the 2 years. But it's not something that you volunteer unless you are actually detained. So any documentation you have on you, you should not disclose unless um, you actually are detained. So I want to make that as clear as possible. If ICE comes up to you, starts asking you a question, your first instinct is to remain silent. Okay. That's the first thing you should do. Remain silent. Also, do not provide them any documents. I know I say have that on you, but have that on you just in case, they have a warrant to arrest, to detain you, right? Have it on you just in case you do get detained. That way you have documentation to show that you have that 2 years in the US. Okay. However, do not volunteer the document. Another thing, okay, with an approved I-130, you can have the receipt notice, those documentation on you. Like I said, don't volunteer it. Okay, do not volunteer the documents unless you are actually detained. Um, and more important than that, do not sign anything. So, what can happen is someone may be detained and they may have the documentation, and ICE will say, hey, sign this and we'll let you go. If you do not know what you're signing, please do not sign it. Tell them you want to consult a lawyer first before you sign anything. Because one thing they can do is you can voluntarily choose to put yourself out of the US. Okay. And they will use that tactic. So there's a form that they can give you. If you sign it, you're basically saying that you're okay being deported, right? You're not going to fight your case in court. You're choosing to leave the US. If you sign that document, it's very hard to unring that bell. Okay. It's very hard to take it back. So, really important, do not sign anything, especially if you're not subject to expedited removal, because you can put yourself by signing something into expedited removal and not be able to see an immigration judge. Is the ICE now on duty or about to? Can you explain more? So ICE officers are always active. Their job is to enforce immigration law. So it just depends on what you mean by are they now on duties or about to. So ICE officers are not they're law enforcement, but they're not like police or army or National Guard even. They are more similar to like FBI, but not really. Okay. It's because immigration law is civil. So when you break immigration law, it's not a criminal law. So that's why when people say, oh, well, anyone that breaks immigration laws are criminals. No, it's civil. So they're not really criminals, right? So immigration law is civil. It's a civil enforcement agency, basically. Um, However, they can show up with the police to have backup and all of that, but they're always on duty, right? They're always working. What we don't know right now is how much they're using the military, because that was one of the things that um, the administration has says that they really want to do is use the military to enforce immigration laws. So we don't know to the extent that they're doing that right now. However, we do know what we do know is that they have been um, a couple flights to Guantanamo Bay with immigrants on it. Okay. And there was a flight to, I want to say Panama because my brain is not. Recently, there was a flight to, I believe it was Panama, where it was mostly people from Asian countries that were put on those flights. Now, before people get scared, we do not know the person's immigration status. They may already have deportation orders. Okay. So typically, before they can remove you from the US, you have to have a deportation order or be subject to expedited removal. So, if the person already has a deportation order, it's going to make it easier for ICE to find them and to remove them. Okay, because they don't need to go through immigration court. And most people are not going to request a lawyer or don't even know that they should in those situations, because sometimes you may be able to show that you have reasonable fear of harm coming to you if you were returned to your home country. And then ICE will need to do like a full evaluation to see if you have reasonable fear. And then they may put you back in immigration court proceedings. So it's a whole process to it in some situations. And then in other situations, it's as easy as being picked up and being removed from the country. Now, one thing people need to know is the country that they're removing you to needs to agree to take you. Okay. So if they want to remove you to your country of origin has to say yes. So they can't just take you there. All right. So if they want to deport a Mexican citizen, the country of Mexico has to say yes, please. um, bring this the person can be brought back to the country. I know there was the flight that was supposed to go to Mexico and it was turned back. It wasn't because Mexico were not taking back their citizens. It was because it was a military flight. Okay. If you use a military flight to go into another country, that can be seen as aggression. So, unless you have permission, and they did not have permission to land the military plane. So that's why they were turned back, not because Mexico said, no, don't bring back our citizens. It's more of if you're going to bring them back, you have to use the proper procedure. So that's where we're at right now. And then, another thing that I want to bring to people's attention, do not please do not have your passport on you. Okay, do not carry your passport on you because that's the easiest way for ICE to know your name, your date of birth, and what country you are a citizen of. Okay. So make sure you don't carry your passport on you because it gives them the evidence they need. So that's another thing we're telling people right now. It's scary out there. However, however, it's not as scary as it sounds. Like when you watch the news and they're picking up all these people, we also need to be, take that with a grain of salt, because ICE is putting out this information, right? It's basically propaganda. They want to scare people so much that people are too afraid to do anything, or they choose to self deport. So, and I've gotten those calls where people are like, okay, can I just leave the US without having an issue? I have my passport. I just want to leave. Right? I've gotten those calls, and those are so hard because they don't even, some of the people I talk to, I'm like, can we at least make sure that there's nothing you qualify for? But they're so afraid to even do that, that they just want to know if they can leave. So if you take nothing else out of this, find out if there's something you actually qualify for. If you are so afraid to be picked up by ICE, get a consultation. Figure out what you may qualify for, how you can make it happen. Okay. And sometimes there's nothing you qualify for in the moment. However, you can at least know that, and then know how to move in your day-to-day life. Okay. If someone comes to me and I can clearly see that they qualify for cancellation of removal, and then they end up being detained by ICE and put in removal proceedings, they already will know, okay, well, I can ask for cancellation of removal. I have evidence that I qualify for it. And I can at least know that I have a path to getting a green card, even if I'm put in removal proceedings. Right. So it's one of those things that, like, if you just let the fear take over, you're not going to look at anything else. You're just going to assume that, everything is burning down, nothing is working, no cases are being approved. That is not true. Cases are still being approved, um, as long as you qualify for it, right? That's the main thing. You want to know, do I qualify? What can I do to make sure that I qualify for this? All right. I'm doing a video next week on basically the 3 ways that someone can be in the US for decades and not be able to gain status. Okay. And how that can, affect family members, because sometimes you think as a family member, oh, why isn't, this person that has money helping their family to gain status? And sometimes they just can't, because the person doesn't qualify for it. And there's reasons that can lead someone that's in the US, even if they have money, to not be able to adjust their status, to fix their status. Okay. But it's hard. It's hard. It's hard. It's hard. But just know I will always be here giving you the information you need. All right. Um, if you have a green card application pending with USCIS, they're going back to interviews. So most green card applications, if not all, are now going to go back to having interviews. During Biden, we got interview waivers everywhere. Like, if you file your application and you include enough documentation of your relationship, if you can show the officer that your marriage is real, the officer can use that to go ahead and approve your green card application. That is no longer the case. Okay. Especially for marriage-based green cards, you are going to get an interview. And it's going to, here's my prediction, right? I'm not a USCIS officer, but here's my prediction. Some officers are going to be hard on marriage-based cases. The ones that feel like it's their personal, mission in life to deny as many applications as possible. I have one of those in my local field office, right? Every time I walk in there and I see that he's the one with my case, I already know it's going to be a fight, and we're going to be fighting, right? So some of them are going to use this as a way to just, deny as many cases as they possibly can. However, However, the most important thing when it comes to interviews is to be prepared. Okay. That's why for my clients, we do a full mock interview. right? A full mock interview where they are, I'm asking them questions as if I'm the officer. I'm asking them questions separately. We're doing that so that one, they can see if there's inconsistencies, right? Maybe someone remembers a date differently or, stuff like that. But two, they're used to the type of questions the officer is going to ask and the attitude the officer is going to have when they're asking the questions. Those are the two main things, right? You want to be used to the questions, but you also want to be, used to the attitude that you may get, because some officers will act like they don't even want you in that office right now, right? That you are disturbing their life by applying for this green card application. And then some officers are nice and pleasant and just, love their job. So you can either get one or the other. But I always, when I do mock interviews, I play it as an officer that really doesn't want to prove your case. And I'm going to nitpick on every single detail so that when we get to that interview and the officer doesn't nitpick, you're okay. And then if the officer nitpicks, you're okay too, because you're already prepared for that nitpicking. So that's really the key with those. What about I-751? Are they now calling for interviews too? Yeah. So most marriage-based anything is going to have an interview. So marriage-based green cards, removal of conditions, yeah, all those are prime cases for interviews. So don't be surprised, right? Do not be surprised if you get an interview. It does not mean that anything is wrong with your case. It just means that they're no longer making, most cases interview waived, right? Most cases, if not all cases, are now going to have interviews. And that is the new normal. So if you get that interview notice, just know it's normal. It has nothing to do with your case. You could get in there and the officer will ask you like 2 to 3 questions and that's it, or they can do a deep dive, right? So it does not mean that there's something wrong with your case. It just means that the policy has changed. And you just need to move forward knowing that the policy has changed and that you now have to take these steps to make sure that you are prepared for the interview. Okay. Marriage-based interviews, I-751 removal of condition interviews. Be prepared, especially if it's based on abuse, if it's based on divorce. Those who are going to get interviews, so please be prepared. My US citizen wife filed for me. We are currently on consular processing outside the United States. Her divorce decree became absolute on 20th February 2024. Okay. What's the question, Peter? Did you file before the divorce became final? Okay, those are the same dates. So her divorce decree became absolute on 20th February 2024 when it's supposed to be 20th February 2024. So those are the same dates. I showed her the error after a few months later, and we had already filed the I-130 marriage petition. So it depends on if it is an error. So those dates are the same on my screen. So maybe edit to let me know the exact dates. However, if let's say it said 2025 instead of 2024, that's easily fixable with the court, right? That's not something to be really concerned about because the divorce is final. That's the main thing, right? Just because the decree has a wrong date on it doesn't mean the divorce is not final. They need to work on getting the right date on the divorce certificate. The court has to basically determine that the date is wrong and issue an updated divorce decree. But that's that would not kill the case. Okay. So it wouldn't typically kill the case as long as the divorce was final before the marriage took place and before the I-130 was filed. That's the key, right? The divorce had to have been final before the marriage took place and before the I-130 was filed. Now, there are states where once the divorce, even if you get married before the divorce is final, it would automatic once that divorce becomes final, it will automatically fix the marriage, right? The marriage will still be valid. It's valid on the date the divorce becomes final. So it just really depends on the specific situation and the court the person is in and the state the person is in, I should say, right? But in Massachusetts, we have some, it's one of those states where if even if you get married before your divorce is final, you have to wait for that divorce to be final before you can then file based on that marriage, or you can get married again. But it's not any of that. If the person is not in the US and the divorce took place outside of the US, they need to go through the court to get that fixed. Okay. Because if it's not fixed, USCIS, they just look at what you give them. They're not going to do deep research. Okay. So if they look at the divorce certificate and it doesn't look right, they're just going to assume that everything is wrong. So make sure that that is corrected with the court where the divorce took place, and that you have the updated divorce decree ready to send to USCIS once they ask you for a request for evidence. So that's the thing there. All right. So if anyone else has questions, please put them in the comments. Very happy to um, help. All right. So someone did ask me some questions, which I'm going to say this before I answer this question. Okay, I'm going to say this first. You need to talk to your state's family law attorney, right? You need to talk to a family law attorney in your state. I can only talk about my state. What happens if a parent is deported and the child is in the US with someone that is not a parent, right? So let's say you give someone a caregiver affidavit, like we can do in Massachusetts, that gives them the right to take care of your kids and make medical and educational decisions for them for up to 2 years. Let's say you give someone that, right? And then you end up being deported. What happens to the children? Well, the person still has the caregiver rights. Now you and the person need to have a conversation of whether you want the child to remain in the US or to leave the US with you. And if you want the child to leave the US, that means they need to have a passport or at least the right to travel to the country you're in, and they need authorization that will allow them to actually travel with the child to your country. Secondly, if you want the child to remain in the US and not travel to your home country with you, then you need to have a deeper conversation with that person, because now the person will need to decide if they're going to take on the responsibility of caring for your child for the long term, right? And in order for them to do that, they're probably going to need to file for guardianship through the court and have some form of documentation beyond just an affidavit. So that is really part of the family preparedness planning, is looking at not just the short-term fixes, but also worst case scenario, if the person is deported, what happens to the children, right? Having that conversation. And that's where a family law attorney can really be helpful in those situations. Okay. How long the I-130 and the I-485 will take in USA if you marry with a citizen in USA. So it's going to depend on where you live. In my area right now, so in my state, which is Massachusetts, those are taking about a year and a half to be processed and interviewed. So that processing time may change now that they're scheduling all cases for interviews. Okay, there's only so many USCIS officers, and they can only do so many interviews in a day. So that's why having the interview waivers was really helpful. So they only had to interview cases where there were, issues that they needed to figure out, or they needed more information or to update the forms, things like that. That's what they were scheduling interviews for before. But now, if every single case is going to get an interview, that processing time is going to get longer. So that's the unintended consequences or intended consequence of bringing back that um, interview process, right? So right now, a year and a half, you know, a couple months from now, it could be two, right? So I can't really say. However, as of right now, it's still about a year and a half in most places. You need to check the processing time in your specific location, because the I-485 goes by your field office. So it's not going by your I-130. So when you're checking the processing time for a green card application filed in the US for someone in the US, you don't go and look at the processing time for the I-130. You look at the processing time for the I-485. So that way you can pick your field office. And once you pick your field office, it will tell you how long that specific field office is taking for a green card application. Because the field office that does the green card application is also going to decide the I-130. Okay, if you just check the processing time for the I-130, all you're going to get is how long it takes at the National Benefit Center or at the Service Center. So you really want to get very, specific with that application. Now, if the person is outside of the US and you're filing an I-130 for them, then you're going to look at the general I-130 processing time. But if you're filing that green card application, that I-485, that's the processing time you want to check. Okay. All right. So remember, if you have questions, put them in the comments. Let me see if I missed anything. Oh, you're very welcome, Peter. Like I said, I'm I'm literally here to help as much as I can. Like in my practice, obviously, if I'm representing a client, they're paying me for my time and my knowledge and resources. However, I am limited on the amount of people amount of cases I can take on, because I handle my cases, right? When you call, when you schedule a strategy session with me, you are speaking with me. So I can only do so many of those and work on cases. And being able to do these lives and be able to, answer questions and give you as much information as I possibly can is really, it's the great thing about the internet, right? It's the great thing about the internet that now I'm able to do this where maybe 10, 15 years ago it wasn't possible on this level. So very happy to do it. Hi, Cindy. Thanks for joining. If you have questions, put them in the comments. And if you're watching this on the replay, don't forget to put your questions in the comments as well. I do go back and respond to those. And if you would like to schedule a consultation with me, you can go to my website, lilylegal.com, and click on contact us so that you can see the times that I'm available and schedule on there as well. So that way, um, you don't have to, that way you don't have to wait on the phone or anything like that. You can just pick a time that works best for you. Oh, thank you. That is such a great point. I'm just gonna show y'all this comment. Thank you so much. Yes, please do share, because the more people that can see this, the more people can be helped, right? With what we do, like I said, I can only help so many people on an individual level. So being able to come here and just give as much value as I possibly can. So let's share this. There's a lot of false information out there, and the more we can share real immigration news and updates with people, and they can know where to get accurate information from, the better we can do for our community. Okay. All right. Peter has a follow up. Her divorce decree became absolute on February 20th, 2024, but it was typed wrongly as February 20th, 2023, when it was supposed to be. Okay. Okay, so it was supposed, I'm guessing it was supposed to be February 20th, 2023, but it was stamped as 2024. So yeah, she would need to get that updated because that's a whole year difference, right? That's a whole year. That can be the, and if you two got married in between those dates, that can really be a problem for the I-130 process. So you really want to work on getting that fixed as soon as possible. Oh, you have it updated. Perfect. That's the most important part, right? Having it updated so that when, if USCIS comes back to you about it, you have it ready to go to send to them. Okay. Do I have to get a lawyer if a US citizen parent filed an I-130 for a married child and get back an I-797C form if you are in the US? So it gets complicated. So when a parent files for a child that is in the US, if the child does not have valid status the whole time the application is pending, when the application is ready for a visa, they're going to need a waiver. Okay. They're going to need a waiver. So you file the I-130 and then you wait for a visa to be available. Right now, those are taking like 15, 16 years for a married child of a US citizen to have a visa available, right? Not for the I-130 to be approved, but just for a visa to be available. And you have to wait for that visa to be available before you can apply for the waiver, because the MVC needs to let you pay the fees and all of those things before you can even apply for a waiver. And the waiver will be if the person is in the US without valid status at the time that the visa becomes available. But it is very, it is hard to know where things are. So at a minimum, get a consultation from an immigration lawyer to make sure that you understand the process and you understand how long it takes and how long it may take in your case. And if the person is going to need a waiver, to start that process of figuring out what type of documentation you're going to need for the waiver. So it's kind of more of a planning thing. Once you file the I-130, you really want to start planning for those next steps and make sure that you know what to do next. And that's where the lawyer can really be helpful in helping you with those next steps. All right. Okay. It will sound crazy, but based on what I have heard so far, it'll even helpful if detained by ICE and put in deportation proceedings if in consular processing, so you may get your green card without leaving the US. So it's going to depend on the person's situation, right? If the person qualifies for cancellation of removal, they may be able to get a green card through that process. Cancellation of removal requires um, unusual hardship, so extreme and unusual hardship to the children, right? Or spouse or parent that's a US citizen or permanent resident. So if the person has a spouse that's a US citizen that will suffer unusual and extreme hardship, then that could be a possibility. Now, the government's attorney is going to argue that the person can also apply for an I-601A waiver so they don't need cancellation of removal. It's a fight, right? They're going to make their arguments. Your attorney is going to make the arguments why cancellation of removal should still be granted, even though you may be able to eventually maybe apply for an I-601A waiver. So it's for some people, right? For some people, that is going to be helpful to them because you can only apply for cancellation of removal if you are in deportation proceedings. And remember, you have to have been in the US for 10 years or more before you get your notice to appear in order to qualify for cancellation of removal. So it's not going to be helpful to most people, right? Most people being put in deportation proceedings is going to be um, may not have a way to gain status through that process. However, someone like you said that's been in the U.S. for over 25 years and married to a U.S. citizen, as long as that U.S. citizen will suffer extreme and unusual hardship, may be able to apply for cancellation of removal and then prove their case to a judge. Okay. So in some situations, it may be their best bet of getting a green card without having to leave the US. However, do I recommend putting yourself in immigration court proceedings or in order to then be able to apply for cancellation of removal? No, not with this administration. Okay, not with this administration. Being outside of immigration court is your best bet with this particular administration. If it was under Biden and you end up there, you know, that would be the that would be okay because you can apply for that, and at least you'll have government attorneys that are reasonable, reasonable. But under this administration, they are firing judges that they feel are too liberal. Um, So it's going to get harder in the immigration court. Okay. COVID-19 vaccination is up for adjustment of status in the USA. But what about outside the USA? Can I do my medicals without taking the COVID-19 exam? So, yeah. So it's not required anymore in order for you to get a permanent residency, which should, right, which should include the getting a visa outside of the US. So if you're applying for an immigrant visa, which is the only type of visa that really requires a medical on that level, you would then not be required to take the COVID vaccine and be able to still get your visa without it. So it's really important that people, keep that in mind, especially if you have not gotten the vaccination yet. Um, and updating well, the physicians should know this, but some of them may be, headstrong about it. So just just be prepared for that. And Manny, I'm glad I answered your question. I know sometimes I feel like I answer a question in a roundabout way, but I'm so glad it was clear what I was trying to communicate there. All right. All right. I do not see any other questions. Thank you all so much for still joining me in my weird timing today. I had a meeting that ran longer, and I didn't want to, when I have people coming to my office and are asking me a question and I want to help them, I'm not going to just like cut off the meeting. I know I want to be here and give y'all this information, but when someone is in my office and need my assistance, I'm going to kind of prioritize that. But at the same time, I didn't want to kind of leave you with no Q&A and no update. So that's why we're here. All right. So thank y'all so much, Peter. You are so welcome. Thank you. Truly appreciate you all hanging in there with me and always always dealing with my timing issues. I know I wasn't here last week. I My daughter was sick and I just there was no way. There was no way I could make it work with a sick baby. So I didn't want to go 2 weeks without giving y'all some updates. So thank you so much for joining me. I will see you next week, and we're going to have more to talk about. All right. And if you have questions that you want me to cover next week, feel free to send them to me. You can DM me on you can DM me on YouTube, but you can on Instagram and Facebook. So send me your question. Just let me know you want me to cover it on the next live, and I'll make sure to cover them. And if you would like to schedule a strategy session with me or a consultation, you can do that by going to my website, lilylegal.com, and clicking on contact us. That will give you the times that I'm available for a strategy session or a consultation. And we would be able to speak and see what your situation is, how I can help you, or at least at the very minimum, give you a game plan on how you can move forward with your situation. All right. So thank y'all so much for joining me, and I will see you next week. Bye.